So we are going to start today with probably the most obscure outlier of a presentation that you will hear. So the Shipwrecks project is an international collaboration that I am the international coordinator for, but that involves these various different institutions in South Africa and on the African continent, but also most notably the new Smithsonian that you see going up on the mall, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I'm going to be wearing two hats today. I usually give a presentation that is with my hat as an archaeologist. I'm going to skew a little further towards my other hat as an anthropologist of development and somebody who's trying to bring some of those insights to bear on the archaeological work that we're doing. I know nothing, I have no formal training in tourism. Everything I know is from Don Hawkins. So you can blame him for whatever it is that I say in that respect. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what the Shipwrecks project is, because I can see sort of quizzical views here. Our core mission is to use maritime archaeology to study, provide new insights on various different types of slave trade, but also to identify and protect this heritage worldwide. It's a very sort of the center of this is an archaeological rationale, and this, if I were talking to a group of archaeologists, I would probably elaborate on this further. I'm not going to do that, and this may seem enormously obscure. At the same time, we have discovered that it is somewhat compelling to the broader public. So on June 1st, the cover page of the New York Times talked about the ship, and some of you may have seen this, that we identified in South Africa, and some of those artifacts will be featured as the center part of this new museum's exhibition on the slave trade. And evidently compelling enough, we've had over 250 different outlets all over the world that have covered this. This particular shipwreck, the project is not limited to that. It's a global project with regional activities in West Africa, Senegal, in Mozambique, in South America and the Caribbean, including Cuba, St. Croix, and Brazil. But I want to talk about what we are concerned, the point of entree that we have in this project is how do we find the resources to pursue this seemingly obscure activity, and how is it that we then go about protecting this once we've identified these particular artifacts and study them. And this is what led me years ago to actually begin a discussion with Don Hawkins that has led to what we do. And again, this is, oh, look at that. Just to give you a little bit more background, the work that we're doing in South Africa actually is the first time that anyone has ever identified a shipwreck that was actively involved in slaving, and over 200 people died on this. And those of you who are interested in this, the Thanksgiving special version of 60 Minutes will be focusing on this story. And Scott Pelley was with us in Mozambique and in South Africa in May and June. So very briefly, we're very interested in a series of other issues. Whose heritage is this? These are global stories that connect. And so the São José story, even though it went down in South Africa, was bringing people from Mozambique to Brazil. It was a family, this is 1794, that had connections on 4 continents. Example 2 will be something that probably will come to light in the next few years in Florida. So we have a signature approach in which we look at a particular shipwreck, but then we go and we look at the potential descendant communities, the points of origin, the intended destination, and we put together international research teams that try to look at this archaeologically in terms of ethnohistory and ethnographic research. And we have other approaches, for example, in St. Croix, where we are approaching the slaving landscapes approach, where we're looking at everything that was involved in that area was related to the slave trade. So, and we're pioneering some new relationships. I don't really have time to talk about this, but the relationship between the project and the new museum is a symbiotic one that will lead to repopulating that exhibit over time with new research. So that's the Shipwrecks project. Our signature approach, though, is that archaeology is never enough. And this really comes from our engagement with the problem of how do you protect the shared heritage in developing country contexts. And we have been working over the last few years to harness research and development through, I used to say, safe tourism, and now I'm going to introduce a new term and be, as I told Don, impudent and stray into tourism research, havens or transformational tourism. So what is havens tourism? I presume that you all in this room know what SAVE tourism is. Scientific, academic, volunteer, and educational. The Safe Travel Alliance has been involved in our project for the last 5 years. And havens tourism, I want to introduce sort of the notion of heritage and network building. And as I told Don, the only other option for an acronym was SHAVEN. And so I thought that havens probably would be a little more apt. So more than just adding H, heritage, and I do want to talk about this because heritage and sort of the African diaspora is central to what we do. But I think the more significance is in adding what I call the network building. And this is what I talk about as transformational tourism objectives, in that a primary objective is to turn people from who are tourists initially, say tourists, into something other than tourists. That can have, they can be stakeholders who can have broader developmental effects. So how do we use safe tourism as a hook to create something that is not just tourism? So key questions. There are 3 perspectives: archaeological perspective, what are the projection challenges that that create this project, and how can we address those through havens? From tourism and development perspective, does this approach offer something in terms of strategies for developing the tourism sector in its own right, or also for addressing the way tourism is integrated into development? And the presentation that we just saw emphasize many of the positives, but as anthropologists of development who look at tourism, we also know that there are many dilemmas and development trade-offs, and tourism is not in any way immune to many of those. Does havens offer something else? And do we have solutions to perennial trade-off dilemmas in development? So just to give you a very brief background, the protecting heritage in the developing world, there are enormous challenges. This is a problem everywhere. But we have, whether it's industrial treasure hunters who are backed by people with political ties. At one point, the former Minister of the Interior of Mozambique during the war informed me that he was going to put a contract out on our heads. This is a problem. Amateur treasure hunters, coastal development. Above all, there's a lack of resources. I mean, if you think about this again, we're not talking about sort of a conventional practice. You don't probably know that many maritime archaeologists. I may be the first one that you've met. The lack of resources for this, a lack of expertise, a lack of resources for protection or management or monitoring. I have been, just the coast of Nampula is 700 kilometers, and the coast of Mozambique is larger than the coast of California. And I've been with the Mozambican Navy, and I mean the entire Mozambican Navy, in one 24-foot boat. All 14 of them with their AK-47s and their commander. So this is a problem. There are also other priorities. I mean, this is from my work with the Vice Minister of Health. They have huge rates of HIV seroprevalence. Why should they invest in something as obscure as maritime archaeology? Or at a more sort of parochial level, the Mozambican fisherman has to feed his family the next day. So how is he going to do that? We have to come up with solutions that I call solutions for the unconverted, people who do not value heritage for the reasons I, as an archaeologist, or others may, but we really have to speak to them at their level, and this is what the project tries to do. So our strategy, going beyond archaeology, involves 3 things: doing, partner mobilization, and catalyzation. So let me just talk very briefly about what we do in Mozambique right now. And I'm focusing on Mozambique Island. First, we do our archaeology. We include and highlight sites around which heritage tourism can be compellingly organized. We recently, and this may be on the 60-minute special, we identified a slave smuggling tunnel that could be easily used, conserved, or additional work done. It's far more compelling than anything like Gore or Elmina. Slaving routes, not unlike the Abraham path that was described. Laror is a very interesting wreck. It will be the first wreck that was ever studied that went down because of slave resistance. It has an enormous role to play in sort of national narratives of resistance in a post-colonial society. We use voluntourists. So Diving with a Purpose is a group of over 2,000 African-American professionals who specialize in diving, and we work with the National Park Service to train them so that they can come and assist us in the field. Now, they also train local counterparts, and we have other field schools as well. Integrate capacity building. I don't have time to talk about this. Embrace the media. Researchers like myself that run from the media, we need to turn around, give them love, and use 60 Minutes in the New York Times, okay? To create a visibility that you really can't pay for. Support and enable local partners in fundraising efforts. Serve as a network and cultivate multiple stakeholders. And here I could talk about this for 20 minutes, but where is it that we stay? We worked with WWF to help people build an additional room in their house, for example, and we can stay with there as volunteers. So, very quickly, partner mobilization, working with other organizations to help build an archaeological research and training center that can bring students, my students can go and get trained. 2016, we hope to do a workshop that launch of the Mozambique Island Heritage Destination Development Process. How do we turn this into the Gorée of East Africa? And then some catalytic examples. In 2010, we actually went, this is so far beyond archaeology, but we went and we sponsored with Brad Weiss, a graduate, I believe, of this program, and he helped organize an assessment of all the S.A.V.E. opportunities in Mozambique. So there are many different ways in which we can go beyond archaeology and serve our own purposes. So Haven's contributions to tourism, and development. So beyond heads and beds, this is at least a term that I've heard before. First, we can offer through things like this assessment a bigger market with more varied offerings. Things like 60 Minutes and these other things, we can really help create an identity for Mozambique. And it's interesting, Mozambique, the tourism sector for a long time talked about developing game parks, the Transfrontier Game Park. The problem with that is that you have something called Kruger, and you have something called Serengeti, and it's sort of like starting in Tanzania and South Africa. It's starting like 400-meter race with everyone else at the 300-meter line. But this area of maritime archaeology, and there are others, this area of sort of the history of the slave trade is something that they could develop as a unique niche. So finally, integrating tourism into development, I think the key is leveraging difference. That Haven's participant imperatives are different from those of mass tourists. First of all, it's a different clientele. They go for different reasons, in fact, sometimes for the opposite reasons as mass tourists. This means they could establish beachheads. So for example, tourists won't go yet to Mozambique Island to dive because they don't have the facilities. But these folks will go in, they'll deal with the issues, and they'll help establish that. Spreading the tourism option. Tourism will never go to Angoche. Places in Cape Verde I know about are problematic for tourism. But for research purposes, they will go. Offering alternatives, going where mass tourism shouldn't go. So a discussion we've had in the Igbo Reserve Park up north, that people would love to turn into the next Zanzibar. However, it's environmentally fragile. So how is it that, whether it's our work or that of people doing environmental maritime work, what is it that they can bring there? How, I talked about where we stay, the choices we make aren't sort of necessarily in large hotels, but in the community. That affects income inequality and distribution. The virtuous cycle of destination and capital enhancement. One thing that research does is it actually enhances the capital base of this type of tourism. Our research will create the destination, right? The cultural heritage that people look at. Higher level scientific capacity building, not just training service workers. And really, I'm done, right? Okay. Can I finish my last two points? I'll be done. Conserve a broader array of developmental objectives, and I could talk about this. How does it serve civil society and reconciliation? I can give a concrete example of that. And we have concrete mechanisms through the volunteerism and through the fees they pay on an Earthwatch basis for sustainability. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I guess my concluding thought is this. There are some things we still need to work on, documentation and metrics and so forth. But if this can be spearheaded and realized effectively through something as truly marginal and obscure as maritime archaeology, imagine what you could do with something that is much more recognizable, has a much higher subscription basis. So I'll just leave that as sort of a provocation at the end, and that's my content.
And I think